Hello, magical people. My name is Lou, and today I'm going to try a little bit of an experiment. One of my personal blocks that I have been ramming up against with regards to this channel is this conflicting knowing, on the one hand, that I need to be putting myself out there in the world in a way. And not only through the service of providing tarot readings for people, but my own authentic words without the tool of the cards to be guiding me. On the other hand, there is a huge amount of fear around that, and there's a huge lack of clarity as to what that means. Like, there's this knowing I'm supposed to be using the words that come out of my face and from my own brain and heart to speak something out into the world or share something of my own unique understanding of the world. And yet there's both fear and cloudiness as to what that means. So the fear is, I think, probably goes back to a core wound or two. And maybe this is something that you see coming up in your own life as well. Showing up is terrifying. Showing up authentically, being yourself, is a really scary thing to do. And stating things that you think about is a scary thing to do. And if you aren't a person who is afflicted with that particular fear, I'm sure you've got your own, but I'll do what I can to try and explain sort of what I mean. I think, like I said, going back to core wounds, it probably maybe hits on two predominantly. One being, I'm not worthy, which sort of lends itself down the thinking train to this feeling of, why would anybody want to listen to anything I have to say? Of course, that conversation becomes a lot more detailed internally, but that's the sort of crux of it, is that I'm not worthy leads me to feel like nothing I have to say can be of value to anybody. And that's where part of the fear shows up, is that by putting oneself out there and not getting back from the world validation in some way, then that's kind of proving that fear true. That's the fear behind the fear, right? So I think another one of the core wounds that's being touched on is, a similar flavor. And it's the, I'm unlovable at some core level. And I've done a lot of work around both of these things, which is why I'm even here at all. But that there's this underlying belief, this inner child, my little Lou, as I like to call him. This little Lou, on some level, is still holding active this belief that I am unlovable. And again, by being authentic, which is vulnerable, and by putting oneself out in the world, the fear is that will be confirmed by the information that comes back at me. I think maybe this is probably, for me, and maybe for many of you as well, complicated by the fact that, cognitively speaking, it's pretty likely that I'm extroverted feeling tool as a tool function, meaning that it's in my second slot. And so there is, the way my brain naturally flows is to be attentionally aware of the way that I am perceived by the external world in some way. So that's kind of a bummer. It does shade those two core wounds with an extra sort of dollop of, we'll just say, importance. So those are the fears. Like I said, there's also a lack of clarity. So, like, there's no one singular thing that I am obviously an expert on. And so that leads me to look at all of the many things that I am not an expert on, to be the thing that I should talk about. And, well, there are very many things on which I am no expert. So it's confusing. It's not like, I am not one of those people, although I've kind of always wanted to be, or I've been envious of these sorts of people, but I am not the kind of person who has always known where I'm going in this life, who has always known that I want to be a musician or an artist or a biologist or a doctor or anything. Like, I've never had one singular driving goal burning from the inside out. So where does that leave me? Well, that leaves me with this little experiment. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm just going to sort of freeform yammer a little bit and just talk about a couple of things that I have been thinking about of late, and also draw a couple of cards, and just as things come out, see how the cards pertain to the thoughts that I'm having. So it's funny because the first two cards that kind of fell out here are the Seven of Swords and the Nine of Wands. And like, the Seven of Swords speaks in a way of, there's multiple lenses that you can look through any card, but one of the things that this card can be indicative of is taking something that's not yours, or being dishonest in a way. And of course, the Nine of Wands is overwhelm. So how does this pertain to what I've been thinking about lately? I think that Seven of Swords coming up is pretty big. And maybe in this case, I could even call it like imposter syndrome, a little bit of imposter syndrome coming up, because, again, there are those core wounds being activated of, I'm not lovable at all, and the world is surely going to prove that to me, and I'm not worthy. So anything I have to say is just utter shit. And so that's, I think that's interesting. And where that leads is that, like, there's a part of me on my healing journey thus far that is aware that those are core wounds. And as such, they are not something to overly identify with. And I feel like I've already been able to make a little bit of separation on that count. And so I can see that even though those two core wounds are being activated, that's just what they are. And much like any other wound, the wound does not define the being on which it is. So like when you get a bruise on your arm, you wouldn't be like, oh, I am bruised. No, you can clearly identify that is an external affect that has been placed on your corporeal body because you knocked yourself or whatever. So it's easy in the physical world to be able to separate those two things. I think emotionally, when one's core wounds are being activated, some people, myself included, would often like refer to like triggering events. Then there's this thing that happens emotionally or internally that you kind of can't see the wound. You are the wound. And so I feel like on my journey thus far, I've been able to differentiate a little bit between, sometimes anyways, between being that pain and that wounding and being in that activation of that, and also seeing that it is just an activation of a previously existing wound. So with that insight comes and this is probably just, an additional defense mechanism showing up. So it's like peeling back the layers. But where I am with this right now is that because I can see that those fears in some way aren't real. I mean, they're real, but they're not real. It's the interesting space that these energies sort of live in, because on the one hand, they are not real. Like, it is real to say that, of course, I am lovable. And so are you. We all are. Of course, I am lovable. That doesn't mean that everybody will love me, or that somebody not loving me makes me not lovable. And because I can see that, that sort of makes me feel an increased sense of responsibility and obligation to continue to push through that. So that can lead to this feeling of like overwhelm, because I can see that there has been some healing that has occurred. And so I feel obligated to continue that healing. But again, because my discernment is still nascent in some ways around these things, it's incredibly possible and likely that that sense of obligation is actually just the reaction of a different core wound or defense mechanism that's sort of showing up to try and keep me from the actualness of doing the damn thing. I don't know if any of that's going to make sense. I feel like there were a lot of internal leaps that were happening that probably didn't get conveyed. And also somebody is texting me, so you're probably going to hear that weird noise because I forgot to put my phone on Do Not Disturb because I'm not an expert in anything, including this. So my apologies, my dear friends, my magical people. All right, so where was I? Yeah, so a sense of overwhelm can show up from this. Now, I was driving in the car the other day and I had one of those thoughts that was both very profound and very kind of afterwards. I was thinking about it and I was like, is it even profound or is it just like dumb and silly and obvious? But whatever. I'm going to share it with you anyhow because I feel like it shifted something for me, maybe a fraction of a degree, and maybe it'll do the same for you. And I was thinking about, it's going to sound so trite, my apologies, but stay with me. I was thinking about life as breath and how there are periods in our life, and they may be short or they may be long, where we feel an expansion. And then there are times, of course, in life where we feel constriction and retraction. And again, these may be feelings or moments or periods of time that last, hours, days, weeks. It's going to be different for everybody. And I mean, I've certainly had both experiences of bigger periods of time, the more like major arcana times in my life, let's say, but of course also just on the daily, the sort of like minor arcana level of the day, of daily interactions and experiences. So there's this constant expansion and retraction. And of course that makes sense because you can't have one without the other. But beyond that, for myself, I often view the periods, and especially as I've gotten better able to metacognate about my experiences, but in the periods of my life where I am doing a constriction of some sort, there's a really heavy sense of judgment of the self that comes with that. And I just had this moment the other day where I thought to myself, I never judge an exhale. Because without the exhale, there can't be the inhale. And the very notion of judging oneself for breathing out is just silly. To judge oneself for breathing out instead of breathing in, it's just like a dumb thing to even think of. And yet I do that to myself with regards to my own life all the fucking time. So when I have these moments of constriction or retraction or things leaving my life, dealing with negative experiences, whatever one perceives as a period of retraction, and it again will probably be a slightly different flavor for us all. Maybe you also have had experiences of judging yourself in that moment. And I think perhaps we both ought to remember that we can't have that exhalation, restriction and contraction. That we can't have that. That sets the stage for expansion and growth and the bringing in of life-giving energy. I feel like that was a very long video to get to that somewhat brief conclusion. So we'll see. I'm curious how I'll edit this or if I'll even share it at all. Like I said, this is all an experiment. But But thank you, my magical friends. If you have watched this, if I have posted this, and if you have watched it and you have gotten to this very moment, I appreciate the energetic space that we coexist in. And I wish you well. Please don't forget to be kind and gentle with yourself. And hopefully, I will see you soon. Ha! Okay, postscript. As I was getting up from the table to go turn off the camera, I realized I never looked at the bottom of the deck. And so I picked it up. And that, my friends, is the Three of Pentacles. That is the energy of putting your work, whatever it may be, out there. Damn, I guess I might actually have to post this video. Hello, magical people. Hello, magical people. My name is Lou, and I can hear my own mouth moving. Comfy, wide for hydrate.